Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for giving up your lunchtime. It's probably a sign of impending insanity on your part, but never mind. I'm sure it will be quite all right by 1 o'clock. I've got far too many slides today, so I'm going to do a bit of galloping through. Not only that, but I think for some of you at least, some of these ideas are going to be unusual, to say the least of it. So pin back your ears, oh wise ones, and let's see what happens when we start to think what quality actually is. It's a challenging question. There are so many aspects to quality, aren't there? And if you ask people and read the literature, you hear about leadership and staff and the resources. You hear about whether you've got good quality frontline services or partnerships, and other people, rightly, I think, specialize in employer relations and they study the labor market. But what is quality in your labor market information? Is it having the latest figures on your region, on the different sectors, or is it popping around to that cafe at the end of the street to see whether they're recruiting this week? It's really difficult sometimes to know exactly where we want to focus our attention. And what I'm going to suggest is that the way we think about quality and the metaphors we use to describe our service are really important to the conclusions we reach. Now, it's a pretty elementary fact for any linguist or philosopher that we use metaphors, that is, words that bring an idea with them, but are not designed for their purpose we use them for. We use metaphors all the time in our lives. And here on the screen, you can see a collection of metaphors that I dug out just by spending half an hour surfing our industry on the internet. Barriers to work. A track record in the community. Well, what on earth would a track record be when you look at it? It's a metaphor for something, but it's quite hard to say exactly what. And then everywhere you look, people are described as being our greatest asset, which always struck me as something of an insult. I'm not an asset, I'm a person. But if you're the boss, what you need is assets because you've got to deploy them. So what we find when we start looking at the language we use is that the language and the metaphors actually frame our thinking, and they start to define what we call quality and what we measure. What I hope I'm going to show is that sometimes that's really helpful and sometimes it's downright misleading. Here are a few more examples. Success is nearly always regarded as up, and effort is upwards. And if you're having difficulty, it's because you're down. Now, there's no logical connection between the words and their normal meaning and their metaphoric use, but it's so commonplace that we don't even notice. In our business, we see that circumstances that clients and ourselves, but clients in particularly, find themselves in are regarded as being forces. There's a pressure to earn a living. You might be driven by your targets, and unemployment might pull you down. Now, those words actually are quite irrational in relation to the meaning that we're going for, but they have an enormous impact on the way we think and the action we take as a consequence. So when we go navigating the labor market, we have an image perhaps of sailing a ship on rough seas or getting lost on the M25 or something like that. The image brings a feeling with it, and the feeling conveys to us a sense of purpose and directs our work. And I'm just about to show you a slide which I think is a really nice metaphor that actually doesn't get used very much, but works a treat. We all know that clients are outputs, and some of our services get paid for outputs, so much a client. But if you think of it like a combine harvester, if we harvest the unemployed and push them out the back as employed, neat little bales of straw, on the way we can harvest economic growth and welfare savings. What a nice metaphor. Because in that metaphor, the frontline advisor is a cog in the wheel of a combine harvester, which might not feel quite so comfortable, actually, because it feels slightly disempowered, and we wonder who the driver is. Perhaps your chief executive officer would be the driver. This metaphor, in a watered down version, is used by people who commission services, Department for Work and Pensions being the obvious one. The metaphor they use is that there is a market for services and that competition drives quality. Notice the word drive. It's a force. So we can force quality to happen by creating competition. And if we measure the hard inputs and outputs, we'll know whether people are compliant with their contracts, and that's going to require precise processes. What you get as a result is supply chains and black box contracting, and as we'll see more later, you get targets and incentives for contractors, and you get benefits and sanctions on the clients. This metaphor of a market for services pervades our business. And in my opinion, it has its uses, but it also does a disservice to the idea of the client as an autonomous person. Another metaphor that is really widely used, and we're going to look at a few more later on, but these two I think are so common that we should have them in our minds at all times, is that clients are rational and they are actors acting on their rational thoughts. Now, elementary first year psychology will tell you that this ain't the case. But if we do think that clients respond rationally to forces, we tend to deploy forces such as action plans and better off calculations, such as motivational techniques and targets and incentives and sanctions. We tend to deploy those forces to achieve what we think is a rational end. Now, when the client agrees with us, that's just great. But it's not really about client autonomy. It's about the application of the metaphor of force. That in turn has a big risk for us. If we find that our forcing fails and doesn't get the response we want, there is a tendency to regard it as wasted effort and to go in for the practice of parking clients who don't succeed. Hence my picture at the top right. If, on the other hand, we find clients do respond as we'd like them to, and they very often do, and they very often want to, and they, this is called more than compliance, this is cooperation. That can easily lead to dead weight. And if you don't know the term dead weight, please type a message in your chat box. I love to see the messages in the chat box, and I'm looking at them while I waffle. But easy responses could be considered as dead weight, which leads, I've called it output farming, I think because I'd used a farming metaphor earlier, other people call it creaming. What's this message? There's a message just too long for me to read from.
It's from Deborah Davey, and it just says, she's mentioned that we have the word matching or benchmarking. It happens everywhere. We benchmark our salaries is what I hear often, as if people were identical units. Quality is impossible if you always consider you know what is best for a client, have a fixed program, and forget that a tick is not a step forward for a customer in many instances.
Wonderful, and I love it. Thank you, Deborah, that you've introduced yet another metaphor so common in our business, and a useful one too, a step forward. The metaphoric journey from unemployment to employment. So do please type more messages and tell me if you agree or disagree, or if you've got thoughts, and use the chat box, because in this rather peculiar Zoomy world, it's just about all we've got that makes sense. So what I'm saying is that the way we think makes a big difference to what is quality. But we ought now to go straight to the question, what is quality? In a previous seminar, and the link to it is there, it's on the IEP's excellent YouTube channel, which you must sign up for. Please, please, I won't speak to you ever again if you don't, which might be a blessing. The causes of quality are linked. I call them causes because one thing leads on to another. But the organization provides training, development, resources, and networks. Those enable the advisor to use their skills, and their skills should be deployed in the local labour market for clients' acquisition of skills and adapted to the client's circumstances. If that chain of causality from left to right and in that sequence exists, it is possible that clients are able to make their own choices and take action. Nothing's perfect. You can't win them all, but that's it. And there's a great deal of evidence to support that view, ranging in quality from good enough to really very good indeed. Let's put a few metaphors onto that, and let's also remind ourselves that quality happens in the organization, it happens for the individual, and it happens in the external world. The same diagram, referring to the organization, has slightly different descriptions for each of the boxes. And in many cases, you can see metaphoric choices of words to help describe what you would look for if you were running the organization. So the manufacturing metaphor that I spoke about a few slides back is on the extreme left and is part of an understanding and a commitment to quality. The rational actor metaphor is about providing the right kind of resources and forces and the right networks, but it also appears down at the bottom right of your screen when you engage with the social and cultural structures and you expect your clients to be rational in their responses. So our metaphors, our thinking about quality at organizational level does not help us escape from the metaphors. They continue to be there. When we look at the same pattern of causes for the individual, that's the individual advisor and the individual client, we see a slightly different arrangement of metaphors. One of the most common is called diagnosis and treatment, where you think you can have an assessment of the client, work out what they need, provide it for them. They, of course, will behave like a rational actor, and bingo, you get them into work. Another very common one is the marriage broker, where you meet your client, decide what they're looking for, go out to the labour market and broker a relationship. Now, marriage broker is a lovely metaphor because it can be highly productive, but it can also, if it's misused, be really dangerous to a client, because if you get the wrong match, it's just not going to work, is it? And it's you that's made the choice. So there are metaphors which work at the level of the individual. Social justice is a very interesting one, because advisors are often concerned, and rightly so, for the disadvantage that their clients feel and the social injustice that's presented to them, whether it's because of perhaps a race or a religious or a disability reason. An injustice is to be righted. And seeing our services through the social justice metaphor has a real impact on what we think the outcomes ought to be and the way we ought to run our services. It also has an impact on the kind of networking we do with social justice organizations. Pause now, because this is perhaps at the individual level, the one where we spend most of our time thinking, how do we get this right? What are your questions? What are your thoughts? Put them in the chat box, please. This silence is alarming. I'm talking too much. Have you all gone away for a sandwich? I wouldn't blame you.
Definitely not, David. I had my sandwich before. We
Well
have had a response. I think, it's a big question, so it takes people a little while to get their reply in. So Deborah, a real example from this morning: a customer has been on every training course offered by a DWP subcontractor and now being asked to move on, but she hasn't understood, been assessed, or even had a conversation as to whether anything she has done to date has helped her. We've just worked on a conversation about her being in control and asking this provider to ensure she can do the basics. Too much is assumed and too little time in knowing the person within the process.
There's so much in that, isn't there? That's lovely, because this goes to the question of resources. Too little time. Time is a resource. And the system here, it seems to be pushing the client through a rational process, and it's not working. So in fairness, we could say it's, for that client anyway, not a really quality service. And I'm not pointing the finger of blame here. I'm just saying, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
I think, just from my own experience of being frontline, there is very much to use another metaphor, tick box exercises that were carried out with participants, that you had to make sure certain things were done, regardless of whether it was relevant to their situation or the person that they are. In some ways, things have changed, but from the conversations I can see happening, there is a lot that still remains the same.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Tick box is a really good metaphor, and it speaks to the idea that if the system is carefully designed, engineered, as it were, there's another metaphor for you, then it will work. And the way you check it is by having people tick boxes all over the place, and that leads to bureaucratic drag. Here's Miriam.
Yeah, Miriam says, different metaphors all have pros and cons. So are we to be flexible and bouncing from metaphor to metaphor? And what are the dangers of doing that?
Gosh, even Miriam and I are having a side correspondence about quality, and she's way ahead of me in that question. Yes, of course, we have to be flexible. I'm not sure if we have to bounce, but it's a nice metaphor. I think the dangers, what do we think? The dangers of bouncing around your metaphors are that you get completely lost in a maze, there's a metaphor, of your own making. The advantage is that you can look at the way you're thinking in shine different spotlights, take different perspectives. I'm going to go on, and now, oh, I should get a page down somehow. There it is. Not only are there organizational and individual quality factors to think about, but there are external causes that absolutely place limits on what we can do. On the left hand of your screen, we've got the law, the contracts, the regulations, the need for compliance, our metaphors being the market for services, the moral duty of clients to comply, the concept of inputs and supply chains, all of which sometimes, not always, place targets on advisors and emphasize the rational actor view of the client. I don't know if you've thought of it before, but it occurred to me just this morning that the word career is itself a metaphor. It's become so commonplace in our language that it now has two meanings. The first being sort of runaway horse going as fast as possible, careering downhill, and the other being the purposeful progress through your working life. There's another metaphor, moral hazard. And please do write yes or no or question if you've met that term.
We've got another submission from Deborah. She said, I tend to think that each of us is snakes and ladders. Is a snakes and ladders board. Sometimes we move in a straight line or can use a ladder for a quick fix, but be prepared to slide down when something doesn't work. As long as the person is still on the board rolling the die, then we have a chance of a quality winning outcome. Time is a barrier to quality too, so it helps that I do not have to have a time limit.
It's brilliant. How nice not to have a time limit.
Yeah, and Miriam likes that metaphor, snakes and ladders.
I know, yes. Some please, will one of us design a snakes and ladders board for use, and we'll get the IEP to publish it. How about that?
Okay, David,
I think that would be really nice.
And then also Biddy's put, if English is not your first language or you're not educated in the UK, some metaphors can be damaging to self-esteem. If the context of use is not understood, we should be mindful of power, superiority and fear.
Yes, absolutely right. And that's a particularly difficult one for someone like me who's been brought up in a really monoculture culture, white, more or less middle class, very little contact in my life, some and highly instructive with different groups. But I'm sure, Biddy, you'd agree, knowing you and being a friend as you are, I'm sure you'd agree that actually moving outside your social comfort zone is a terrific learning experience and something advisors really should do as much as possible. So these external causes limit what we can do, but they also very much shape how we think about what we do. So now this question of quality is starting to get a bit complicated here, isn't it? I'm going to kind of simplify it by looking at it like this. Not like that. Click down. There's a set. I've written on the left-hand side of your screen a number of things you might want to do well. And in the middle column, things, thinking frames, ways of metaphors. We're comfy with that term. And on the right-hand side, what you get if you use those sorts of metaphors. If you want to devise an efficient program, you're inclined to use the manufacturing outputs, customers and costs model. And as we saw earlier on, you get your black box contracting, supply chains, benefits and sanctions, and none of which are particularly helpful to individuals. So that's It might make an efficient program, but those metaphors don't necessarily cut the mustard. And who likes that metaphor? I love that metaphor. I've been using it all my life. They don't necessarily cut the mustard at the individual level. If you want to solve clients' problems, you can think about the barriers they face. You might think of them as the rational actor, or you might think of it as diagnosis and prescription. And that leads direct to things like personality tests. People who've seen my other seminars know that I'm not a great fan of those. Action plans, which can be great or disastrous, depending on the content, tends to lead to advisor control of the situation. And we had that example from Deborah earlier about that. Also supply chains and partnerships who feature in efficient programs, and also in help from specialists. Moving down, suppose we want to change clients' thinking, motivate them. That's a common theme. The rational actor theory is one, and it's got very, very weak evidence, but that rational actor leads to the use of Forcefield Theory. Does anyone know about Forcefield Theory, or am I so old-fashioned that it's been overtaken by other things? Anyone? Please say yes or no. No. Oh, you're all so shy.
There is a conflict, yeah. So yeah. No, yeah, we're not familiar. No, they are coming through. So yeah, just.
And someone just teaching. I mean, Forcefield Theory is terribly simple. It's a very pompous name for a very simple thing where you add up all the forces encouraging someone to take action, like go to work, and all the forces discouraging them, and you try and work out the balance of them. And work to improve the force in the direction you want. It is, in both theoretical and practical terms, a completely trivial way of thinking about things, but it has its uses. Yeah, Lewin's force field analysis. Yeah. Hello, Anne. Nice to see you. Hey, great. So many friends here today. I feel quite comforted. Another really interesting metaphor, and one that I personally go overboard for, too much so, is the idea of the skilled craftsperson. That the advisor working with a client or with a group of clients is skillful and exercises a craft in relation to them, such that their skills can be listed, but the exercise of the skills is highly personal and very subtle and very beautiful. Now these, excuse me, these metaphors lead to all sorts of different interventions, and interestingly they also lead to sanctions and conditionality when they're linked to the device of an efficient program, and sanctions actually are pretty unhelpful when it comes to motivating people. In fact, they're very demotivating. So even the group of metaphors in something as straightforward as changing clients' thinking and motivation, even those metaphors conflict with one another. Let's go. Click one more. We could go on all day like this, so I won't belabor this slide too much. But it's the same format. Top left, if you want to improve your service, you've got to put some effort. And remember, effort is uphill. And another metaphor used, nice old-fashioned one, all hands to the pumps. So if we're going to improve quality, we need a quality improvement system, because we want our effort to be purposeful. You know, we need an engine to drive us uphill. But unless we know exactly what we're looking for, unless we've defined our metaphors and our quality outcomes, the quality system itself can be a bureaucratic drag. So you make the effort, but you don't get up the hill. We think of organizations as being people, and that can work very well for us if it's leading to cultural cooperation. But I bear the bruises from not thinking it through properly and ending up with cultural conflict in a partnership to provide services. It was extremely bruising for all of us, not my greatest moment. The journey, the moving clients towards work, and the journey metaphor and the future being a place is everywhere you look in our business. It's highly contentious because it leads to two different approaches. Distance traveled, very popular with advisors because they know they're making progress against quite difficult circumstances. And goal setting and monitoring by managers because they want to get those outputs that they defined when they use the efficient service metaphor. I haven't time to go into them today. It would take a week, but the journey is not a wasted metaphor, and there's been some top-class research in Ireland about measuring distance travelled and measuring it in realistic work-related terms. So let's bear in mind that any one of these metaphors deserves thinking through and probably its own research and its own logic. If you want to help someone choose an occupation, you can go straight to the career matching systems, in which case, good luck with that one. There are lots of kinds of quizzes, but you can also do exploration by going on work placements, for example. I've always liked work placements because the client gets their own first-hand experience. They're doing the exploration. So that's, if you want to find suitable work, once you've chosen what you want to do, we often find ourselves in marriage broker mode. But it's also exploring, isn't it? And we get vacancy search systems and the endless online systems to find those jobs that are published in that way, employer liaison to find those jobs that are really available and how to get them. And I wonder how many of us here today have worked in a recruitment agency before becoming employment advisors. Is there anyone? Simple yes, no, maybe.
Sorry, what was the question again, David?
The question is, have you worked in, yes, there is, Deborah's worked for Motorola in recruitment. Have you worked in recruitment before working as an advisor or similar post in employability?
I was a travel agent and a greengrocer in my time before.
Did you say greengrocer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What a brilliant job. That must Yeah,
the sales. My point was sales in both of those, selling products and selling holidays. So not recruitment, but definitely sales. Definitely
sales. So the recruitment agency approach is really appropriate, but as we can see, it's only one way of thinking about this. When it comes to competing for work, excuse me again, when it comes to competing for work, get out there and sell yourself is the message, isn't it? It's treated as marketing. The client is expected to have a sales pitch, whether it's a CV or going around door to door. And they're expected to have their personal capital in the way of skills, competencies, and experience. So you can see here that we're getting a real old mix of metaphors relating to the things we want to do. And I think everything in the want to do list is stuff that I hope we'd agree with. But what we get as an output is quite conflicted. It's not all working in the same direction. And indeed, there isn't very strong agreement about what the direction should be. If your metaphor is the market machinery, it's easy to say we are working for outputs, but that doesn't actually take us far enough because of all these different ways of thinking about how we achieve that. Any questions at this point before I move on to something slightly different?
Just give it a moment, David, if people are just in case they're having a type. From my own point of view, it's very interesting, the things that the words we throw out there sometimes when we're trying to put together a conclusion or a way forward or some sort of directional sign for ourselves, and the potential implications of the words we use and the metaphors we use.
Yeah. While people are thinking about their questions or comments, I'm not sure that it's possible to think at all without using metaphors in one way or another. So my argument is not that we shouldn't be doing it, it's that it's really something we've got to be careful about.
Yeah, so we've got a couple here. So Deborah has said, I only have one reason to do what I do, that those I work with are in a better place than when they started their relationship with me. Very, very nicely put, Deborah. And Miriam has said, for a metaphor to be embedded in the organization from the bottom all the way up to the client, how would that work if there are different metaphors at each stage and some conflicting?
Yeah.
So I guess you might use this type of language for one level of individuals and another for a different level, and they may conflict in what the understanding or meaning thereof.
I think you've given voice to many of the problems that we hear advisors and managers talking about, that they're not actually, as we say, on the same page or using the same metaphor or having the same thinking frame or quality system. It's tough. It makes our work a lot harder. I want to go there. Now, just leave the metaphors for a moment and go back to our thought about what quality actually is. And I think there are three things that we mustn't miss out on. We've talked about quality as organization, individual, and environment. And in each case, we can see that there are causes and chains of events and causes and that lead to success, however you choose to define that. Those causes, and this is very well supported by evidence from around the world, are successful when there are supportive relationships between service and client. And those supportive relationships are successful if they focus on progression. Take away any of those three bubbles or circles, and there's a risk that you don't get the result the client's looking for, or that you're looking for that matter. Put that in this frame. We need to start by asking, does this person need help, or why do they need help to get where they want to be? And we pour that into our chain of causality. We see what comes out the bottom in the way of a feedback loop, and that can help us with the critical quality question. Is helping effective? Because very often it's not. And the corollary, what is effective helping? Because ineffective helping can actually harm the people we're working with. And that's another theme, and probably another seminar. Are we doing good or are we doing harm? I don't want to go there today, but I want us to think that the feedback loop from what we do must always involve the question, why are we helping? And is it effective? And what is it that's working? Because not everything that we have to do, like ticking the boxes, not everything is helpful. The supportive relationships, and I said before, and I will go on till I'm blue in the face, and you're probably fed up as well. Supportive relationships are supported by excellent evidence from around the world. The skillful behaviors of advisors become possible when the organization supports their use and supports their advisors. Those skillful behaviors enable clients to take autonomous action, and that autonomous action is enabled by the trust they have when they're working with their advisor. This is good old-fashioned stuff, isn't it? Can't say it too often though, because as we've seen, some of the metaphors we use interfere with the use of skillful behaviors. And purposeful progression means that the advisor's skills, here I am back on my skilled craft metaphor, the advisor's skills mean regular and in-person exploration of jobs, helping clients get the skills they need for each stage of their journey, there we go, journey to work, and becoming embedded in social and cultural circumstances of our clients. That kind of progression enables clients to choose a job, find a job to compete for it, and when they've got it, they can keep it. So that's purposeful. If you don't have that in your system, in your activities with clients, all the quality relationships and all the necessary causes may not go where you'd like them to go. Pause for thought here. We've got 10 minutes, I think, before we conclude. Pause for your thoughts and comments, please.
Going back to what I think it was Deborah in the beginning about people being given the same, multiple training courses and multiple things to do without addressing the fundamentals behind the reasons why they're with you in the first place. Yeah. And again, by doing those tick box exercises, you can actually further disengage and further distance somebody from where they need to be at the end.
Yeah. So there you see the machine engineering metaphor is the tick box exercise. The failure and the repeated going round and round doing lots of training courses is a revolving door metaphor. And the working out what a client needs and giving it to them is the medical diagnosis metaphor.
So Deborah has said, Deborah's popped in and said, does what we are called add further confusion to this quality issue? Some are employed with a few weeks training, others have years of experience. Do you mean the employability practitioners, Deborah, or the unemployed? Yes, us. Okay. Yeah, I mean, from our experience at the IEP, we get this a lot, and we are trying. I think there is an attempt to standardise it across the sector. So that you get practitioners and then you get participants, which would be lovely if everybody used the same term.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always come down in favour of advisors because it's sort of advice rather than guidance, but I don't know, who am I to say? What do you call yourselves? What do you call what's your job title at work?
Mine used to be consultant. We were employment consultants back in the day. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, employment and training officer or employment coach trainee.
Yeah.
Trainer assessor. Yeah, so yeah, employment support officer. So yeah, there's lots of officers. I'm surprised. That always seems like such a connotations for me to the sort of military or police force, the word officer.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And it conveys a sense that one's not just the ordinary, what do you call them, frontline private.
Yes.
Yeah. Employment advisor.
There's some similarities.
Yeah. So, with a few minutes to go, conclusions from all this? Well, I think I said in my note, it wasn't going to be easy. And I don't believe it is. I really don't. But I think if unless we allow ourselves to use all the metaphors that we think are helpful, and unless we criticize our metaphors and are aware of their limits and their influence, unless we can take a multiple perspective on this, we're not going to get quality. Deborah, maybe us officers are mercenary in our approach. We charge in, don't light brigade, do what has to be done, and then leave. Yes.
Without anyone ever having known our name. So mystery officers. And yet Lisa, quite challenging when working on externally funded projects, which have hundreds of boxes they want to see ticked. Very true. And I imagine on bid writing as well, there would be something similar.
Dreadful, dreadful. Does anyone remember the European Social Fund? Wasn't that awful?
Yes. Oh yes, says Lisa. And also there is another comment from Miriam. Kaizen is Japanese business approach for quality control, very effective in the car manufacturing industry. It involves making incremental improvements and enlisting ideas and effort from everyone and working tirelessly till the task is done. As far as metaphors go, I'd say while eating a whole elephant can seem like an impossible task, I don't imagine it will last long in piranha-infested waters. Apologies for the gruesome description, but very apt. Many hands make light work, I suppose is the metaphor that goes with that. And then we have a new message from Anne saying, I also work with MenCap, and you must be really careful with autistic young people who do not understand and can take things very, very literally.
Yes, very good point, Anne. Yeah. And personally, if I've got an elephant to eat, I always use a teaspoon.
Yeah.
Please jump in with your thoughts, people, because you've given up your time, and I've tried to be a little bit provocative, perhaps not too much.
I think it's a very good interaction you've had today, David, actually. Everyone's been very involved, and for me personally, in terms of working with the L&D of the IEP, it's given me a lot of food for thought when we do throw these things in. As you say, they are useful, because when you can't think of something specific that you want someone to understand, using a metaphor can really help them, because it creates a mental image which people can connect those sign-ups. Yeah, and Tracy's put very informative, thank you very much. So yeah, it's very interesting, and also from Biddy, thank you very much, very insightful. So
don't forget, you've got to think about your metaphors for the environment you work in, hostile or friendly as it might be, the individual you're working with, and the organization you're working in. And you have to think about progression, relationship, and causes. And all of that. So it ain't easy.
Absolutely. We've got some more messages coming. Deborah has said, I use mind maps and a character called Napo, which is Euro health and safety funded animations. They are great, worth looking at for those that struggle or are neurodiverse. Anne has said, thank you, David. It's very easy to pick on the negatives, but this was also really useful. and Lisa, really interested in some good, and it's good to be challenged on some of the metaphor traps we might fall into. And Deborah, as always, very thought-provoking, a great way to spend my lunchtime. So a great use of everyone's time, David. So fantastic.
I've put the references up here, if only because if they're there for a few seconds, anyone who's fool enough to look at this on YouTube can actually read them, can freeze frame it and read them. These references, the one I want to point to you is, of course, showing off myself, is the first reference, second paragraph down, top left. A review of quality standards for information, advice and guidance services published by the Growth Company, and there's a link there for you to get your copy of it, is a review of over 300 sources of quality research, policy, advice and guidance from around the world, and that was completed last year. So there's quite a lot in there, and quite a lot of the evidence for what I've been saying today is in there. And if you want to get right back into the nuts and bolts of metaphor and thinking, it's a bit of a doorstop, this book, and it might send you to sleep at night. But Lakoff and Johnson's Philosophy in the Flesh describes the use of metaphor in thinking. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Very, very much indeed. It's immensely kind of you to come and listen to me chuntering on in the way I do, and a great pleasure for me. I can tell you, really great pleasure at the end of a long career in this business to have an opportunity to share ideas.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much, everybody. As David has promoted a few times, which is fantastic, is the fact that this will be on YouTube. So if you think it will be of any use to anybody, please let them know where it will be, and it should be there in about 10 days after the bank holiday weekend. And yeah, just to say, please do subscribe, and then any sessions you do miss, you can go back to and listen at your own leisure. So once again, thank you everybody for giving up your time. We very much appreciate it, and there's lots of thanks in the chat. And yeah, so we'll let you go and have a good rest of the week, and have a lovely, nice long weekend.
Yeah, enjoy the weekend. Plenty of good food, I hope.
There you go. Thanks, David.
Cheers.